Striving for mediocrity in a world of excellence. This is the Chaser Report.
Hello and welcome to the Chaser Report. Well, the Democratic National Convention is over. Kamala Harris has spoken. What did she say and what did she reveal about the kind of president she will be? Did she make a convincing argument to become president? And is Donald Trump essentially finished after her oratory? Well, David Smith is back here, Associate Professor at the University of Sydney's US Studies Centre. Hello, David.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
100,000 balloons apparently dropped at the, I think it's the United Center in Chicago.
Yes.
At the end of the speech. But Beyonce didn't turn up. What was she thinking?
Beyonce did not turn up, but if it's any consolation, Tim Walz just looked like he was having the time of his life with those balloons. I've never seen any man look more sincerely happy to be surrounded by falling balloons.
So you can't fake that, can you? A simple man from Nebraska who likes balloons.
Yes, yeah, whether it's falling balloons or hugging a piglet, Tim Walz is a man who appreciates the simple pleasures in life.
More on the balloons in this speech after this. So this was a big moment. Now, we talked to Emma Shortis on yesterday's podcast about the speeches we've had so far. Before we get to Kamala Harris herself, I'm keen to get your sense just of what the Democrats needed to do in this week and in the star-studded rollout of presidents past, and potentially emerging as well. Who did you think did well, and did they deliver on what they needed to do to try and put Donald Trump to bed forever?
Well, the Obamas were the standout, and I think that to the extent that they wanted to recapture as much of the Obama 2008 atmosphere as possible this week, that was very important. And in general, I think that they did manage to bottle a bit of that, especially in those speeches. I thought Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez gave an outstanding speech, which affirms that she is one of the future presidential candidates of the party and really cements her status as the leader of the progressive wing of the party.
Because a few of them got disendorsed, from what I understand.
That's right. Two of them got defeated in primaries this time around. Joe Biden got to give what was essentially a farewell speech.
Wasn't it the longest speech of any in the whole?
It was definitely the longest speech of the convention. It went for more than an hour, in contrast to Harris's speech today, which was a tight 35 minutes. But I think they had to give Biden that.
Yeah.
They had to give him that to defend himself, to go out on his own terms. It was not the most scintillating speech, but he did look more alive than he has looked for years.
And it was late at night, right? Like,
it was
the whole thing dragged on, and
it was very late at night, but there were no slip-ups. It was reminiscent of Biden 2 or 3 years ago. So
not 4 years ago. That was a much better. But I mean, maybe he did, ironically, maybe he did just have jet lag and a cold in the debate, because that was a whole other level. But
and his son had just been convicted as well. That would have been a tough thing to
you wouldn't have slept. But the other thing that people point out is that was him off the cuff rather than following prepared remarks.
Yes,
and I must say, we were talking to Emma about this. I don't know that a lot of people in the room were going, well, gosh, he was robbed before his time. He had 4 good years ahead of him. Because, I mean, he delivered the usual lines, but it really was just a remix of the same themes. Democracy's on the ballot, all the stuff that we heard. Indeed, in his last campaign, he didn't seem to have anything new for 2024.
No, he didn't. I don't think anyone had any regrets seeing that speech about the way that he went out. So Tim Walz also gave a speech that was actually most notable for the reaction of his son, Gus Walz. And, I feel there is a constantly expanding understanding of disability, which Biden himself really helped with 4 years ago in terms of stuttering. Neurodiversity is one of the frontiers of expanding understandings of disability, and that was the neurodiversity moment, which I thought was very important.
Oh, I missed that aspect of Gus Walz's of story. Okay,
yeah, he has a non-verbal learning disability.
Right. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
But gosh, the emotion on his face was written very, very large indeed.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So I think that overall the convention went about as well as they could have hoped for it to go. There were no notable mishaps. You know, there was a lot of fear of protests, but due to incredibly heavy security and policing, all of the protests were about half a mile away and were apparently not particularly big, I think, probably because protesters realised they weren't going to be able to get anywhere near the convention.
And the Chicago police didn't brutalise any of them this time around.
No. Right. So disappointing for extremists on all sides.
Admirable restraint, really,
yes,
from the
but
Chicago
no,
PD.
it was not 1968. And there was the Oprah appearance. The last time that she appeared at a convention was to endorse Barack Obama. So yeah, I think that things went about as well for them as they could have hoped for. Yeah, with the Obamas and Ocasio-Cortez, for me, being the outstanding speakers.
Yeah, and I mean, Hillary Clinton certainly got to look back a bit nostalgically on, and somewhat bitterly on her own journey. She said it was cathartic to get up and talk about that. And I guess the continuity between her and Kamala Harris is pretty considerable. But in terms of where they needed to go, it did feel as though, in a sense, almost as though Kamala Harris had always been the nominee. In a strange way, it just feels as though it's kind of locked in now. And the contrast seems far starker for whatever reason between Harris and Trump.
Yes.
And between Biden and Trump, it's not just the old white guy thing, but in terms of the messaging, it did feel as though the pitch from the Democrats was a lot sharper and the contrast was a lot greater than the Biden version of the argument might have been.
One of the things that I was thinking during Harris's speech and during other parts of the convention I saw was that it just met the standards of professionalism and discipline that we used to expect from politics. And, okay, maybe that turns some people off because it's too sharp, it's too overproduced, it's focus group to death, whatever. But I think it makes a refreshing change at this point from both the Biden and Trump versions of politics, which involve a lot of rambling.
Yes, they do. I mean, to be fair, the Biden speech was, as much as it was kind of cookie-cutter phrases put together, there was an awful lot of them.
Yeah.
And not really very compelling.
No.
And I must say, I want to give credit, because I haven't done this on the podcast to the RNC, the number of what-the-fuck moments during the course, the number of 80s wrestlers. I mean, what on earth Hulk Hogan was doing at the RNC. Yeah. And the idea that it would in any way assist anything, that any occasion would be better for Hulk Hogan and what's his name, Vince McMahon, all appearing, and that Ken Kid Rock, like the three of them with this sort of 80s testosterone-clad or 90s in Kid Rock clothes, back-to-back bizarre nostalgia.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have minded more of that at the DNC. Like, everyone seemed to have a point. Everyone spoke well. I didn't see a bad speech at the DNC, although I didn't see some of the endless lieutenant governments on night one. Governors on night one.
Yeah, look, I saw some speeches I wasn't particularly impressed with, but there was nothing disastrous. There was
sort of a pity in a way.
There were no jaw-dropping moments.
I think Hunter Biden was, it was a shame he was off the bill. I think he could have done something interesting. No, but look, they stage managed it very thoroughly, and again, quite amazing they pulled it together as quickly as they did, because you can't tell me that rundown is the same one that there would have been for Joe Biden.
Well,
I mean, the Clintons and Obamas, sure, maybe.
Yeah.
But it was a pretty, certainly diverse crowd. I think it was her name, Jasmine Crockett, the Texas congresswoman who I really enjoyed. She had some good hits on Donald Trump.
Yeah. They over the first couple of nights, there was a concern about a lack of Latino speakers. But over the last two nights, there were a lot of Latino speakers.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was talked about a lot was leaning into the themes of freedom and patriotism. So you couldn't escape the word freedom at the convention. That's what they have embraced as their positive message. And it's a good one, even though freedom in recent decades has often been associated with right-wing messages. Get the government out of everything except the bedroom. Franklin Roosevelt in 1940, with his Four Freedoms speech, really appropriated freedom for kind of left liberal causes. He said that there were these four fundamental freedoms in America: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want and freedom from fear. So with those things, you have the embrace of personal freedom, you have the embrace of pluralism and diversity, you have the idea that the government needs to protect people in all kinds of ways and needs to provide for people who can't provide for themselves. And freedom is not just about freedom from, it's also about freedom to. This was the distinction that the philosopher Isaiah Berlin made about positive and negative freedom. Negative freedom or negative liberty tends to, we think of it as a set of issues that is owned by the right. But what Democrats do when they're most successful is to claw back both things.
Interesting.
That they can be in favour of freedom from, they can be defenders of free speech, and they've really refashioned abortion as a freedom from issue.
Almost every speaker made this point.
Yes.
It was clearly very central to the strategy that was coming out, both the concept of freedom, the Beyonce song and all that kind of stuff, but also the link to abortion. They're clearly feeling this is strong territory. I think every speaker that I saw made that link.
Yeah, and I think this is something that Walls does particularly well when he talks about not wanting the government in your libraries, not wanting the government in your bedrooms.
Yeah, it feels almost Republican, that form of rhetoric. About keep the government out of whatever it is. But
yes, it does. But then you marry it to and the government needs to provide things like meals for children in schools.
Yeah.
It needs to provide health insurance for everybody. These are the freedom twos. These are the things that enable people to live flourishing lives rather than actually surviving. So, I mean, in a sense, the great fault line of American politics is one that's been there for nearly 90 years now. It's, are you for or against the New Deal?
Yeah, isn't that funny?
Yeah, and Democrats are most successful when they have a big New Deal program. And I think that is what they are trying to recreate, albeit with a very kind of updated flavour. I think that Harris has been very conscious from the beginning that she needed a positive message to sell, that it couldn't just be an anti-Trump message. They've got plenty of anti-Trump stuff in there. And in Harris's speech tonight, there were some pretty heavy doses of it. But they did need, they needed positive slogans as well. They settled on freedom. I think that's a good one. And there was a lot of patriotic imagery, patriotic language, lots of flag waving, going on. A message of hope and affirmation of the country, in stark contrast to what Trump does every time he's out of office, which is to talk about the United States as this country that is going to hell, that is, that's turning into the worst country on earth.
So there you go. Just, I don't know whether you've seen the story, David. It only broke a short while ago. But in terms of freedom in the Beyonce song, have you seen this? Stephen Chung, the Trump campaign spokesperson, apparently put the music under a video, 13-second video of Donald Trump descending from a plane. Why, we don't know, but we do know that Beyonce's people immediately got onto it and issued a takedown order, and he had to take the whole thing down. So, I don't know what that plan was, if it was some sort of witty riposte to the DNC.
I don't know. First of all, I'll say over 8 years, the various iterations of the Trump campaign have become incredibly familiar with takedown notices from musicians.
No one wants to.
I think Kid Rock is the only one who doesn't issue takedown notices.
Isn't Kid Rock the only? I remember making a list in the book that I wrote, Trumpedia, about Donald Trump, of the artists who played at his inauguration.
Three Doors Down.
3 Doors Down, I remember, and I think Kid Rock. It really was the sort of absolute nadir of kind of 90s kind of mainstream funded alternative rock. Yeah, 3 Doors Down certainly. Is it Kryptonite?
Yes.
Yeah, which is not a great image.
No.
All right. So, look, we can talk about Donald Trump shortly and how he's responded. The point's been made that he still hasn't got a good nickname. So until he manages to come up with a nickname,
and
it's kind of his one trick.
Workshopping names with his audiences.
Yeah. Still hasn't settled on one. In a moment, let's talk about Kamala Harris's speech and how it all went down. And I guess the pitch she's trying to make, the positive pitch to be elected.
Yes.
Now, David, one of the interesting points, just responding to what you said before, that Ezra Klein made, I think, in the New York Times, is that Joe Biden's whole pitch on Trump, which worked so well last time, was to heighten the fear of him and to build him up as a threat. And both candidates were very happy last time around when they were talking about Donald Trump. Joe Biden thought it helped him. Trump thought it helped him. This time, clearly, that it wasn't cutting through, that Trump was a threat. It wasn't front of mind. And so Kamala Harris has clearly realised that a whole new approach was needed.
Yes.
And that she needed a positive framework. Now, I feel as though almost nothing had been revealed in terms of what she might do as president thus far in the campaign. And she probably didn't know, given that her job for the past 4 years has been to do whatever Joe Biden thinks is a good idea as VP. But some aspects of what she wanted to pass, there were commitments and pledges that she made on the stage in Chicago and a pitch to the American people for the positive things a Harris presidency would do. What grabbed you about her pitch?
Well, I think the most memorable aspects of her speech were not actually the policy pitch. It was the biographical stuff.
Yeah.
Saying that, she wanted to become a prosecutor because of the experience that her best friend had of being unsafe in her own home, being assaulted by her stepfather.
That was really quite confronting. I hadn't heard that story before.
That was very powerful stuff. I thought quite a notable thing was, even though, she talked about her mother's story and her father's story, she didn't really talk that much about her personal identity.
Yeah.
She didn't do the things that both Obama and Clinton had done of leaning into the firstness of it.
Yeah, she doesn't tend to do that, does she?
There are plenty of other people doing that for her. There's, no one's going to not realise that. Instead, she talked about, in very classically American terms, the positive immigrant experience. You don't complain about things, you change them, you get things done. She described herself as a child of the middle class, but also talked about growing up in a working class neighborhood in the Bay Area, so quite deftly straddling the sort of dual class identification that many Americans like to have of I'm proudly working class, but I'm also middle class because middle class is good.
I think she's getting California's electoral votes.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. And just on a side note, if there's ever a danger of someone running up the popular vote and not winning the Electoral College, it's Harris, because the California vote makes it pretty likely at this point that she's going to win the popular vote.
I just assume now that Democrats always will. Unless there's a sort of, it was only Bush 2004, right? Like in the middle of a war.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just assume Democrats are actually going to get the most votes. Not that it matters in the brilliant American system.
Yeah, there is a long way to go and a lot of things could happen. But if the election was held tomorrow, I'd be pretty confident she would win the popular vote by quite a margin.
Which will do her no favours. Just ask Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. She didn't. So her policy pitch on the economy is we'll create an opportunity economy. One of the most interesting things about that, though, was she's really developed this line of attack against Trump, describing his tariffs. She didn't mention the word tariffs, but this is what she's talking about, as a national sales tax.
Yeah, that jumped out at me too. And a few people have talked about this recently, just how radical an idea that it is, that every import has 10% put on it, and what that would do to inflation and what that would do to the much vaunted middle class. Yeah,
and she's worked out that this is a really effective line of attack, given cost of living is one of the real drags on both her and Biden of the last 4 years. And so it's an issue she has to take head on. The main proposal that she has is to create anti-price gouging legislation. So far, that's been suggested in very vague terms. We don't know what it looks like. So, Trump and people on the right have interpreted this as Venezuelan-style price controls.
But we can all agree gouging's bad. It sounds bad. It's gouging.
But then on the other hand, you've got people like Paul Krugman saying, oh, no, this is just an extension of the kind of laws that Texas already has on the book. We really don't know what that is going to look like. But the pitches keep cost of living down. She talked a lot about her housing plan. Or she didn't actually talk a lot about it, but she mentioned that she has a housing plan.
It's always good to mention you have a plan without having to say what it is.
Yeah. So, and it's actually one that would be familiar to us in Australia. It involves payments to first home buyers.
Yeah.
She talked about making capital available to small business. It was in many ways, your classic liberal picture of, hey, we can all work together to make a better economy.
Yeah, look, if you really want to fix housing affordability, the Australian model's the way to go. That's
absolutely, Everything we've done has worked so well.
And look, I raised with Emma yesterday, I think you told me this, the notion that Harris has been able to campaign as a generic Democrat to a degree, that she's just able to, if you like Democrats at all, you'll probably like what she's offering.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest challenges that she had to confront today, and has had to do throughout the campaign, is what to do about Israel-Gaza, right?
Yep.
And she really was very emphatic on this. And it's a line that isn't used that often, but it doesn't involve all that much cognitive dissonance to my mind to say, well, both these things are wrong. Like we need Israel to defend themselves completely, but also a lot of people have been killed in Gaza, and that is not good. I mean, both those things are fairly easy to defend at this point, aren't
Look,
they?
okay, not to go too much down memory lane, but do you remember, like, in our university debating days, everyone believed in a two-state solution?
That was just the one-word answer to any...
that just seemed like the logical, obvious answer.
Yeah.
So everything, like, it's not actually that hard to thread this needle.
Just actually, give them both territory, keep them safe from each other. But, of course, we haven't had a true two-state solution.
No, we haven't. But, all civilian death is bad. There are 8 million people on both sides of that conflict. The fantasy that one side might just go away is completely untenable, and it's a recipe for murder if you want to, if you want to actually enact it.
And there's been enough murder, frankly.
There has been enough murder, so it shouldn't be that hard to thread this needle. And I thought that she did it very deftly. I think that her position is a great improvement on Biden's, which
has really been pro-Israel. Then the other stuff has been a little bit vague, right?
Yes, yeah. So, I thought she did that well. I think Democrats are still going to lose some votes on this.
Yeah.
There have been calls for an arms embargo on Israel. They're not going to do that. This is going to cost them votes. And
from the left.
Yeah, from the left. Actually, one of the interesting things from Biden's speech was when he said, those protesters outside, they got a point. Yeah, too many people are dying, which is first time I've really heard.
Wow, that's actually, he was
Biden
awake that night, as you were saying.
I thought that I thought she did that reasonably well.
Well, this is what I guess the sort of meta sort of purpose of the speech. It's not just the words, it's how you say them.
Yes.
And in particular, the question of sounding presidential.
Yeah.
And I must say, I thought her oratory was quite remarkable. Having heard her a few times before, but the challenge of filling the room and of sounding in her most strident moments like a commander-in-chief.
Yes.
Bearing in mind, I mean, all the stuff about being the first, but not just the stuff about her background, but also the fact that she's a woman being potentially the commander-in-chief of the military in a way that sort of defies traditional sexist logic. To me, I mean, when she was talking tough about dictators, it did sound to me as though she, certainly rhetorically at least, seemed presidential, whatever that even means.
There are different ways of doing speech making.
Yeah.
She doesn't have the poetry of the Obama speeches.
No,
That's okay. Not every speech needs that. And that is not her background. There are very few poetic prosecutors out there. She sounded authoritative.
She really did.
Yeah, she sounded like she knew what she was talking about. And the fact that from the moment Biden dropped out, she's been so in control of the whole situation.
Surprisingly so.
Yeah. I think that's a very appealing thing to Democrats because there's a real sense that Biden was just not in control. And it could also be appealing to undecided voters who look at Trump as somebody who's got self-control problems.
just a bit.
Yeah. And it used to be a conservative principle that if you can't govern yourself, you can't govern anybody else.
There's a lot of conservative principles that don't hold anymore, but it's certainly true. I mean, he has been provided with a whole bunch of attack lines.
Yes.
And we're even at the point now where he says, I'm supposed to be talking about
Yeah.
this. This is what my argument's supposed to be, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to instead ramble on about crowd sizes or whatever, attack her or call her crazy, whatever it might be.
Yes.
But the thing is, it doesn't seem to be cutting through, David. Certainly the numbers, and we can talk about the numbers briefly before we let you go off to your other podcast recording. By the way, he's just after this, he's going to go and do his 3 hours with Chas on
That's
Pep.
right.
So
Yes.
it's a big day of podcasting for David. But look, he hasn't been able to land an attack yet that's really been comprehensive in a way which is unusual for Trump. He hasn't come across an enemy before, an opponent before that he's had such a lack of focus against. I think with Hillary Clinton, it was a lot easier for him to land punches.
Yeah, it usually comes up with something.
Yeah.
And he's had 3 years to think about this with Harris. Harris being the opponent rather than Biden in 2024 was hardly an unknown scenario.
That's a coup. It's a fraud. It shouldn't be allowed. I mean, the point where he's saying that is pretty desperate, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that for a while I thought laughing Kamala was going to be the line of attack. Like, a woman enjoying herself. You don't want that. And then you don't want that.
Tim Walz has turned that around, as he has with so many other things.
Yeah.
He seems to be just brilliant for this moment. He never laughs. It just turns around. That's not... Laughing is good, isn't it? Anyway, so he's still trying to work out what to do. The prospect of debates in a couple of weeks' time, I think it's the next moment, the next major set piece on the 10th of September at this stage.
Yes.
I mean, given how in control she seems to be, and given her performance in the Senate in those Judiciary Committee hearings where she became famous, this could be a fascinating debate.
It could. So the biggest pitfall for Harris now is that expectations are going to be so high for this debate, which is it's a problem in itself. From Trump's point of view, to the extent that he's thinking about this, I think what he's probably remembering is 2016.
Yeah.
When there were constant headlines about Trump failing to maintain discipline, failing to listen to anybody, being behind in the polls and not being able to do anything to get back. And then somehow it all worked. I'm sure that's what he's thinking.
A lot of speakers.
Now.
I mean, Obama, you could see on his face, he was going, don't be complacent.
Yes,
oh, my God.
Yeah. No, I think that I don't think anyone would be complacent at this point. But I'm thinking that's what Trump is betting on. And let's just forget about 2020.
Yeah.
Because that entire year almost never gets mentioned in Republican discourse anymore.
And 2018 and 2022.
Yeah.
In fact, the last 3 times when his side has lost.
That's right, yes. Yeah. It's 2016 that is on everyone's brain and will be on everyone's brain until the day that Trump, by whatever means, actually leaves politics.
But the thing is, Hillary Clinton, and it's hard to remember this, I mean, she's in many ways, certainly in liberal world, a much-loved figure. Yeah. But she had such baggage. There were so many people in America simply didn't trust her. Yeah. And she had all of the scandal. And, I mean, even though Bill's personal life is hardly fair to charge her with that, but it did seem as though the Clintons had a bit of a... People were sick of them as well.
Yeah.
And Harris is so unknown, despite having been vice president. But as you said, she's been sort of off to one side. It is, nevertheless, she has that Obama-esque, she's sort of a new figure.
Yes.
There's not any scandal, right?
No. And she comes across as really young at age 60.
The fact that she's 6 months younger than Tim Walz is... an extraordinary figure. All right, well, before we let you go off to Chas, David, the last thing I want to ask you about is the polls and your read on them. It seems as though things are trending in a positive direction. There are certainly headlines about swing states moving towards Harris, but it is certainly, even if she is in the lead, it's a fragile lead and an early lead. What are the numbers telling you in the polls?
So let's talk about the national polls first.
Yeah.
There are 6 different poll averages that I'm following at the moment.
I'm glad to hear it.
The Washington Post has Harris up by 1. Real Clear Politics has Harris up by 1.5. New York Times has Harris up by 2. Nate Silver has Harris up by 2.5. The Hill has Harris up by 2.6, and 538 now without Nate Silver has her up by 3.6.
Without notes, by the way, listeners. That was off the top of his head.
I have done the calculation. That amounts to an average of averages of 2.1666 recurring.
The Smith average of averages.
That's right.
You heard it here first.
And
on Pep, probably.
And due to the magic of the central limits theorem, that's the number I'm going to go. Basically, I would say in the national polls, Harris is up by 2.
I don't know what that theorem means. To listen to Pep, and he might explain it in more detail.
Yes. Now, with the state polls, there still, I would say, isn't really enough high-quality polling data to get a very clear picture. I think there is quite a clear picture at the national level. With the state polls, it's much harder to tell. And especially in the really important states, it's a bit all over the place. Pennsylvania, you'll constantly see there's some poll that has Harris up by 1, but then there's another one that's got Trump up by 1. There was the New York Times Siena poll, which is considered a gold standard poll, that had Harris up by 4 there, as well as in Michigan and Wisconsin.
That was their headline.
Yeah, but it was a fairly small sample, though. 667 voters, which is, I mean, it means that the margin of error is quite big. So really, I think where all that you can say, if you're one of the campaigns in that state, all that you could say is it's anyone's race. Yeah. I think she does seem to have clearer leads in Michigan and Wisconsin. The Sunbelt states, though, are also at this point all up in the air. I would say Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia. Georgia seems to be a little bit more reliable for Trump at the moment, but not universally so. Now, there has been some encouraging polling for Democrats in Florida. Like one poll showed Harris within 5, a Suffolk University poll. Another from Florida Atlantic showed her within 2.
This is Donald Trump's home state. They can't do it to him.
But before Democrats get too excited about that, polls out of Virginia have shown a far closer race than Democrats would like.
Oh, okay.
There's one from, I can't remember the university, but good university, that showed a 3-point race, which is a lot closer than Democrats would want.
So things were going all Donald Trump's way before Joe Biden left. Yep. Things seem to be going all Kamala Harris's way since her VP pick is going excellently well. JD Vance is still a huge liability.
Yeah.
And it seems as though just by being on the ticket, Kamala Harris has opened up the whole Sunbelt path as well as the sort of Northeast. And so there are a couple of – she wins either of those if I think it's likely she'll take out the race. But even though there's this sense of momentum and the DNC has gone incredibly well, really, it's still far from in the bag.
It is still far from in the bag. And two other important things to keep in mind are – the 2020 poll miss was even bigger than the 2016 poll miss.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah,
and it just wouldn't be surprising if that happened again. No matter how much pollsters can wait for demographic factors, you can't really wait for the factor of people who answer polls in the first place are probably people with more trust in political institutions and media institutions who are more likely to, to vote for someone like Harris. So there could that response bias could be repeated again.
Because she's from the conventional system.
Yeah. The second thing is that over the last month or so, it's become increasingly clear that Robert F. Kennedy was a drain on Trump's votes.
I was going to ask you about that.
Where I would say, on average, if you compare head-to-head polls and then the same polls with other candidates included, Trump was losing about a point when you included Kennedy. Now, there are some very loud rumors that Kennedy is going to drop out tomorrow. That's Friday U.S. time.
Yeah.
And that he might endorse Trump. In fact, they're not even rumors at this point. He has actually withdrawn. He's applied to withdraw from the ballot in Arizona.
Okay.
He's giving a speech in Arizona tomorrow. That is widely expected to be a dropout speech. His vice presidential candidate suggested in a radio interview earlier this week that they would be open to endorsing Trump. Whether they'll get anything out of that, I don't know. Kennedy had wanted a cabinet position earlier on.
From either of them, right?
Yeah. And when he first approached Trump with this deal, Trump was so far ahead that, there was no need for him to take it. So I don't know if there's a deal going on now or whether Kennedy's just realized that it's unviable, which will be a disappointment to lovers of dead animal pranks everywhere.
Yeah, and brainworm fans, I think
that's right.
We'll feel that one.
But this is something that could add about a point to Trump's prospects across the board. So we'll make it an even closer race than it already is. If there's one thing that in this very murky sort of almost coin toss picture, there's one thing that Democrats can be optimistic about. I'm fairly sure they've got the better on the ground campaign.
They usually do.
Yeah, they usually do. I don't think it's going to be an exception this year, especially with Harris rather than Biden on the ticket. They seem a lot better organised.
There's a lot of there's excitement and motivation.
There is a lot of excitement. Whereas before, when you looked at people who said that they were excited about the election, it was literally only Trump supporters who said that they were excited. Now you've got equal numbers of Democrats. Trump has also been outsourcing a lot of his Get Out the Vote campaign to organisations that have a lot of money and are very supportive of him, but don't have a lot of experience in campaigns. People like Turning Point USA.
Yeah.
That could prove to be a decision that they regret.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
Well, it is bizarre to have RFK Jr. looking at a set of data and drawing a correct conclusion. So good on him for doing that.
Yes.
And look, I guess not hugely. There's the whole argument was who is he going to hurt more between being a Kennedy and hurting the Democrats and being a libertarian and taking votes from Trump. So we'll see what happens with him in the next couple of days. But look, the Democrats seem to have the wind behind their backs, a lot of excitement on the ground. Maybe Beyonce will come to a future event if she didn't turn up to this one. But, I mean, as bizarre as it may seem from an Australian perspective, given how badly Trump is going, I mean, Hillary Clinton will tell you, never rule him out.
It is a very close race.
All right, David, we'll let you go off to Chas. Give him our regards.
I will.
And I hope you emerge safely on the other side.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Our Gears from Road. We're part of the Iconoclast Network. We'll catch you next time.